Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really wild case out of Escambia County, Florida, an area some locals actually jokingly call the Twilight Zone vortex. And honestly, you're going to see why. We're unpacking a multi-layered mystery that completely shocked the nation. We're looking at a story where totally bizarre headlines ended up overshadowing a very grounded, gritty reality. As we go through this, we're going to break down exactly how a tragedy in a quiet family home exploded into this huge international spectacle of magic and espionage, and how investigators ultimately had to cut through all of that noise just to find the actual killer.
So let's start with this incredible hook. In the initial days of the investigation, the local sheriff went straight to the press and literally said, "It's witchcraft. I'll say that right now." Just like that, with just a few words, a tragic local crime was immediately catapulted into an international spectacle. I mean, the media absolutely latched onto this idea of ritual sacrifice and rare blue moons, basically turning a complex homicide into a supernatural thriller. But as we'll see, these headlines, they were a massive distraction.
Section 1. The Bizarre Crime Scene.
Before we go down that sensationalized rabbit hole, we really need to look at the undeniable facts of the puzzle that investigators actually found on Friday, July 31st. When they arrived, the macabre scene inside the Smith family home painted a really confusing picture. First off, there were absolutely no signs of forced entry. That usually tells us the victims likely knew their killer. The home itself was chaotic, just stuffed to the brim with daily QVC delivery boxes, mostly because the elderly mother was a recluse who loved shopping from home. But the most chilling detail? The killer actually took the time to meticulously hide the bodies under massive piles of blankets and clothing. Oh, and the safes in the home? They had been successfully opened. So we're looking at a killer who was comfortable enough to just linger, conceal the evidence, and rummage around for valuables.
The sheer brutality of these targeted attacks on such a reclusive, quiet family immediately begs the question, who would do this and why? Let's look at the victims. You've got Von Sil Bonnie Smith, the elderly mother. She was struck with a claw hammer and had her throat cut right there in her favorite chair. Then there's her 47-year-old son, John. He had special needs described by relatives as having the mind of a child. He was attacked on the couch with 0 defensive wounds, meaning he was probably asleep or just completely trusted his attacker. And finally, Richard, the 49-year-old caretaker of the family. He suffered a gunshot wound, was struck, and also had his throat cut. It's just devastating. Section 2. Secrets, Spells, and Suspects.
Now, what's really fascinating about this case is how quickly the investigation veered away from that physical crime scene and went into 2 wildly sensational theories. It's a classic example of how unique details can completely derail a standard homicide investigation. Theory number 1 focused on the eldest brother, Richard. See, Richard didn't just have a regular day job. He worked in a highly secretive Homeland Security crypto department at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. And you know, when you have high-level security clearances and suddenly don't show up for work, alarm bells are going to ring. A full federal investigation by the Department of Homeland Security was immediately launched to figure out if a foreign assassin or terrorist was behind the hit. But DHS investigators quickly determined his classified work had absolutely nothing to do with the murders.
Which brings us back to Theory 2, the sheriff's highly publicized witchcraft angle. This was tied to the fact that the primary suspect, Von Sil's estranged stirred son, Donald Hartong, practiced Wicca. The sheriff claimed the killings were a ritualistic Wiccan sacrifice tied to a rare blue moon. A theory that was apparently pulled straight from a completely debunked internet conspiracy site. And actual practitioners fiercely shut this down. Wiccan High Priestess Susie Smith publicly corrected the record, stating unequivocally that human sacrifice simply does not exist in the Wiccan religion. This entire theory proved to be a massive, time-consuming distraction for the homicide detectives.
Section 3. Motive, Money, and DNA. So with the supernatural and international espionage stuff completely stripped away, let's talk motive and see how the true story emerges from the shadows. And that motive? It's 0. 0 is the exact amount Von Sil Smith's third son, Donald Hartong, was set to inherit. He had been explicitly excluded from her will. So for Donald to see a single dime of his mother's estate, not only did she have to die, but his 2 brothers, John and Richard, had to die as well.
Fast forward a bit. Years later, while Donald was sitting in jail awaiting trial, he started talking to an informant, a guy named Devin Purefoy. Purefoy testified that Donald actually confessed to the crimes, claiming a Ouija board made him do it. Yeah, but the most damning detail? Donald admitted to torturing his mother's left pinky finger just to get the combination for the household safes. Remember those successfully opened safes we talked about from the crime scene? This specific detail perfectly aligned with the evidence, proving the age-old motive of pure, unadulterated greed.
Section 4. The Forensic Clincher.
Now, even with a clear motive, Donald claimed he hadn't seen his brother Richard in 2 or 3 weeks. He admitted he was at the house on Tuesday to cook dinner for his mother, but he swore up and down he never touched his brother's things. Well, the microscopic evidence told a vastly different story. Forensics ultimately trapped Donald. His DNA was found on the inside of Richard's belt, on the zipper of Richard's notebook case, and on Richard's checkbook, all items Donald swore he hadn't touched. But the absolute clincher? It was found in the kitchen trash can. Investigators found a cigarette butt containing Donald's DNA sitting directly on top of bloody cleanup towels. I mean, you simply cannot have your DNA smack dab in the middle of a bloody cleanup if you weren't there during the crime and the subsequent attempt to hide it.
Section 5. A sloppy crime scene.
At this point, the state seemed to have an airtight case. However, defense attorney Michael Griffith wasn't going down without a fight. He systematically exposed some severe, undeniable flaws in the state's forensic team to plant the seed of reasonable doubt. The defense cleverly leveraged the compromised histories of the state officials. Get this, the very lead crime scene technician who collected that damning DNA evidence had since been fired and was facing 24 felony counts for stealing drugs from the evidence room. On top of that, the state's medical examiner had resigned amid allegations of misusing state money. So the defense argued to the jury, how on earth can you trust the scientific evidence when you can't even trust the officials who collected and analyzed it?
The crux of the entire trial ultimately came down to the timeline. The state argued the family was killed on Tuesday evening, right after Richard came home from work, which is why he was found dead in his work clothes. And Donald admittedly was at the house on Tuesday. But the defense brought in a highly respected expert, Dr. Arden, who argued that based on rigor mortis and body temperature, the victims could not have died any earlier than late Wednesday night. This was absolutely crucial. If the jury believed the defense's science that the family died on Wednesday, Donald, who had ironclad proof he wasn't there on Wednesday, would walk free.
Section 6. The verdict and sentencing. After a grueling 4.5-year wait for the family and just 4 hours of deliberation by the jury, the Escambia County Circuit Court was ready for a verdict. Donald Hartong was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. Now, what happened next was pretty chaotic. Donald launched in this hour-long rant at the judge, calling his own defense lawyers incompetent and demanding a mistrial. Yet, ironically enough, it was those very same incompetent attorneys who managed to save him from the death penalty during the sentencing phase. The jury spared his life, likely looking at his advanced age and failing health, realizing he would die in a state prison anyway.
Faye Haas, the victim's cousin, provided a really powerful reflection that perfectly summarizes the grounded, tragic reality of this case. She had to work incredibly hard to forgive Donald, but her words capture the absolute heart of this family betrayal. She said, "If you put something out bad, expect bad. That's how it works." It wasn't about the alignment of the stars or some dark magic. It was about the bad energy of human greed, literally destroying a family from the inside out.
And that brings us to our final thought. When headlines prioritize sensationalized witchcraft and foreign assassins, how dangerously close do we come to losing sight of the hard, forensic truth? It really leaves you wondering how a media frenzy, fueled by irresponsible claims of secret agents and magic, almost derailed a pure pursuit of justice. It completely masked the gritty reality of a man torturing his own mother for the combination to a safe. It reminds us that while sensationalism definitely sells, it's the quiet, microscopic truths, like a cigarette butt in the trash, that actually bring justice. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, I encourage you to keep questioning the headlines.